Why is the Bible the central issue in the Arab-Israeli conflict? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks for listening, and thank you for joining us. Just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with biblical prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. On today's program, Dr. Dave Schnitker will be interviewing Carol Rushton regarding her brand new article, The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Issues Preventing Peace in the Middle East. The modern world has been embroiled in seeking peace in the Middle East between Jews and Arabs for almost 100 years now. Conferences, summits, meetings, agreements, and treaties have all fallen by the wayside. No amount of time, blood, sweat, tears, begging, pleading, bullying, or threatening have achieved the elusive goal of peace between Arabs and Israelis. Today's program will deal with some of the more important issues that are preventing peace in the Middle East. So let's join Dr. Schnitker and Carol Rushton for today's fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Dane. It is a great privilege to have Carol Rushton on the program both today and next week to discuss her brand new article entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Part 3, Issues Preventing Peace in the Middle East. This is actually the third in a three-part series of articles which comprises the Last Days Beacon article for March, April, and May of 2018. If you are not a subscriber to the Last Days Beacon or would like extra copies of this particular article, our announcer will share how to do that at the end of today's program. I've had the privilege of knowing and working with Carol for many years at a previous ministry. Carol Rushton is an accomplished author and broadcaster and had the privilege of living in Jerusalem for 8 years while working at the Jerusalem Post. Carol has been of great help in launching Southwest Prophecy Ministries, and I'm thrilled to have her writing and broadcasting with us once again. Carol, welcome to our program today.
Well, it's great to be here, as always, David.
Well, it's great to have you in our cozy little set that we have created to help communicate our weekly podcasts. This is, as I mentioned, Carol, this is the third of 3 articles on the subject, the Arab-Israeli conflict. Your first article traced the biblical roots of the conflict between Arabs and Jews going all the way back to Isaac and Ishmael about 4,000 years ago. So this conflict is long-term and deeply seated among Middle Eastern people. This conflict was complicated by the illegitimate sons of Lot, that is Moab and Ben-Ammi, and then the conflict between Jacob and Esau's descendants also sharpened the historical conflict between Arabs and Jews. Your second article documented how the Islamic religion has inflamed these ancient hatreds between Arabs and Jews. And this Islamic animosity continues to modern times, as the daily headlines confirm. Your concluding article that we're going to deal with today and next week deals with some of the main issues preventing peace in the Middle East. The first issue I'd like to deal with really has to do with biblical authority. Now, the Jews base their claim to the land of Israel on the Bible. But at the same time, Arabs claim that the Bible was written by Jews, for Jews, and is full of lies and fairy tales. So how do you respond to this charge?
Well, it's very interesting that in the late 1940s, early 1950s, when David Ben-Gurion was the prime minister of Israel. He wasn't known for being a very religious man. In fact, he lived in a kibbutz, which is very secular, and some of them are really highly anti-religion and anti-Judaism. So he wasn't a religious man, but at one time he actually held up a Bible and he said, "This is our authority to live in the land of Israel." So you can tell that even secular Jews knew or felt that the Bible was true, and this was their authority to claim their ancient biblical lands and the right to live on them, as God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs and the founding fathers of what became known as the Jews.
So in some ways, the Bible is like the founding documents that American patriots revere today, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. So the Bible is the equivalent to them in terms of their legal right to the land of Israel.
That's correct. So I'm a little older now, so I'm going to have to use my glasses, but I do want to. I think that the biblical foundations that both Jews and Christians have in claiming that the Jews have the right to live on the land that God gave them proves that this is true. The archaeology proves the Bible is true, and specifically it proves that Jews were on the land of Israel from thousands of years ago. One of the Arab charges is that, well, this was a recent invention, and the Jews were never there, and they've just suddenly arrived on the scene, and the Arab peoples have actually lived there for thousands and thousands of years, and no Jews have ever been there, and they just started coming back. They just started coming and claiming this land back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and they shouldn't even be here. This is our land. So, but archaeology proves them wrong, and archaeology proves that the Bible is right. So, one of the first things that I read in, it's a marvelous little book. It's mostly forgotten about now. It's called The Bible is History by Werner Keller. He was a German journalist, but he and his wife, you can tell from the writing that they were Bible-believing Christians, which at that time was not a prohibitive factor in him being a journalist. And so, which is a lot of times is now.
Right.
So he and his wife came across a lot of archaeological finds just in his journalism, and they wanted to write a book about this. And I think the Bible as history has largely been forgotten and not quoted or not mentioned, but it's a marvelous little book. One of the first things he mentions is the kingdom of Mari. This was a very, very, very ancient kingdom, but it existed about the same time as around Abraham. So we're talking, 1900 BC, 2000, 1900 BC, around that period of time.
About 4,000 years ago.
Yes.
Okay.
And nobody even knew anything about the kingdom of Mari, that it even existed. It was just, they happened to find this just by doing some accidental digging in Syria. But as archaeologists started to dig, they found thousands and thousands of tablets, perfectly preserved. And on some of these tablets, you had the names that we find in the book of Genesis, like Peleg, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and Abraham. With the names, and also Haran, the cities and names of people that people who read the book of Genesis are very familiar with. So this is something that archaeology corresponds that same period of time that you would have found. Did you find these names mentioned in the Bible? So that's one confirmation. There are some others. One of the things that I think was very, very interesting is that when you get to Abraham and Sarah in the chapters of Genesis, I think it really strikes people as why in the world would Sarah give her handmaid to Abraham to try to produce an heir. I mean, Abraham and Sarah waiting and waiting and waiting for God to fulfill his promise to them for a child. And they were getting older and older, and the years were slipping by, and there was still no child. And at that particular time in history, that you could have a servant even inherit, you could promote them, and they could inherit your whatever you had, your property, your wealth, your cattle, your flocks, whatever you wanted to give them if there was no child. And we can remember when Abraham said to God, you haven't given me a child, you promised, and this Eleazar, who's one of my servants, is going to inherit everything that I have. And God took him out and showed them the stars of heaven and says, I'm going to keep my promise to you, and your descendants are going to be as the stars of heaven for multitude, or the sands of the beach. So, but we think, well, why in the world though would Sarah try to do this, and why in the world would Abraham agree? Well, there were something called the Nuzi tablets that were found. And again, this is another archaeological find. Thousands of years ago, around the same time as Abraham and Sarah. It was not uncommon at that time. If a couple were childless, they could not have an heir for whatever the reason was. And at that time, they didn't have DNA and all the technology these days, so they couldn't do anything about it. They wouldn't know what was the problem back then. So if they had a childless couple to produce an heir, the wife could give one of her servants or her handmaids to her husband, and if the handmaid became pregnant, that was the heir, and the wife accepted that child as if it were her own.
So that was a common custom during this period of time.
Very, very very common. And of course, we in 20th, 21st century America might think that's a little shocking, growing up. But it was a common practice at that time, and the Nuzi tablets verify that as well. Then we have something called the Merneptah stela that was found in Egypt. Now, Merneptah is not a very well-known pharaoh, but he had contact and claimed some victories in the land of Canaan, and but it's very interesting that in this particular tablet that the name Israel is mentioned for the very first time.
Wow. And how old is this tablet about?
It's around, I think, 1200 BC.
Oh, okay. So we're looking at something in the range of 3,200 years ago.
Right.
Okay.
So, and there's also some other very interesting finds that I talk about in the end. We can't go over all of them. But one of them is, that I didn't talk about, there's something called the Moabite stone. And this was found in, Moab was a country, and it descended from the descendants of Lot, and, Moab and Ammon. Well, in this, it talks about the king, one of the kings of Israel. Now, we're talking about 1 Kings, 2 Kings period. So we're getting it in a little bit later on. But it actually mentions one of the kings of Israel, which was Jehoram.
Okay. One of the wicked kings of the northern 10 tribes.
Yes.
Of course, they were all wicked.
They were all wicked.
The northern were. Okay, but a specific king was mentioned by name in this ancient document.
Yeah, this is called the Moabite stone, and it was the king of Moab, and he rebelled. Remember that under David and King David and King Solomon, the country of Moab was subjected, and so they would pay tribute to the kings of Israel. I mean, and because at that time the kings of Israel were very strong. Well, under the Israeli king Jehoram, and this was after the kingdom was split, the king of the Moabite kingdom finally rebelled. And so this Moabite stone talks about this rebellion against the king of Israel, the northern tribes, King Jehoram.
So this would be an extra biblical source that confirms the historicity of the biblical documents themselves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and so we could go on. There's the Tel Dan stela. Now, this was found in northern Israel in about 1993 by, I'm assuming, Israeli archaeologists. There, we do have some American archaeologists that do go over and excavate in the land of Israel, but most of them are Israelis. And so this was, and it was, this tablet mentions the names of some of the Syrian kings at that time. Again, we're talking about First, Second Kings period. Which one of them was Ben-Hadad II. He was the king of Syria. Hazael, he was the king of Syria. But then you have kings, the names of some of the kings of Israel, like Joram, Ahab, Ahaziah, Jehoram, Jehu. You also have something that mentions the house of David.
Wow.
So these, again, this is an extra biblical source that confirms.
From a Syrian source, in other words, not within Israel, but a neighboring country that is referencing the same history that the Bible records in the historical books.
Yes. There was also something that's called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser II of Assyria. And I do talk about a little bit in the article about this. But it's really amazing. They, on this Black Obelisk, it portrays the king of Israel, King Jehu, as bowing down and to the king of Syria at that time, and paying tribute to him.
So an actual depiction, picture you might say, portrait of that historical event.
Yes. There also have been various seals found around the Temple Mount, various kings, naming various kings of Israel. There have been several of those found in recent years. There was, for instance, another little tiny golden bell found near the southern end of the Western Wall. These were the little bells that the high priest would have on the end of his robe.
Okay. When they went into the Holy of Holies?
Yes.
Okay, going all the way back to Solomon's temple then.
Yes.
These artifacts.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then you have, again, you had the founding of Solomon's quarries. That was right under the right next to.
I've been in those quarries.
Yes, and then you have also Hezekiah's tunnel. That's a well-known artifact. You have the king's stables that have been located. There have been some located in Megiddo. You have some that have been located in Jerusalem. Some of these were Solomon's. Evidently, some of them were. Some of them are also some of the kings of Israel. I believe, it was King Ahab and Jeroboam II. So you have a lot of documentary evidence. And of course, then you have something that I didn't mention, but you have Masada.
Right, an entire city.
An entire city, right, that you have to go up to. And of course, that documents the Roman siege of the Zealots and their last stand. And then, of course, the famous story, if people aren't familiar with that, the famous story of how the Romans built a ramp up to the city of Masada. You can still see the ramp today. It's not fiction. It's really there.
And that was in the 1st century A.D.
1st century A.D.
Contemporaneous with the siege of Jerusalem in A.D. 68 to 70.
Yeah. And so, but this was the Zealots' last stand. I think we're actually getting into 2nd century.
Now that was an Arab settlement, wasn't it? Masada?
I don't think so.
But that's really what they have to claim.
Yes.
That these Jewish settlements, demonstrably Jewish settlements, were not settled by Jewish people.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, but Masada, I think some of the kings of Israel and during the winter time, Jerusalem can get quite cold. And so that was kind of like one of their winter palaces that they would go to, you know, because it can get quite nasty. And
So Masada was a Jewish settlement going way back into Old Testament times.
Right.
Not just a New Testament settlement.
Right.
But an ancient Jewish settlement that was, of course, wiped out with the siege of Masada in the 1st century.
Yes, and then, you know, you have the famous story where they did, you know, the Romans were celebrating because they were going to go in and take the next day, and they were going to take these Jews, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, the famous story is that they all committed suicide. And because they did not want to be slaves in the Mormon Empire. And then, you know, so, and you, one thing that I did forget to talk about was that in Rome, you have the relief of that triumphal arch of Titus, the Roman general, in 70 AD, and he depicts taking Jewish slaves back to Rome, and you have, you know, artifacts of the temple depicted on that arch as well. And then, of course, we cannot forget the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in Qumran.
Right. So really what the Arabs have to do, if they're trying to assert this claim that the Bible is merely a Jewish book full of fables, is they have to destroy basically 2,000 years of archaeological history, dating back to the 1st century, going all the way back to the time of Abraham. And so one could assert that there are fables that are being proclaimed, but not by the Jews.
No.
But they understand, that the Arabs understand that the biblical record does include covenants that were made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob concerning the land of Israel. So in order to deny that, they have to take away the entire historicity of the Old Testament.
Yes. And it's very sad that most people just are not aware of how archaeology proves the Bible. These things are not brought out. And I don't think that we as Christians have done a very good job, and I don't know that the Jews have done a very good job. The Israeli government has done a very good job of pointing this out to people and bringing these facts to life. I think that it's very important to, when we want to take a very pro-Israel stand and support Israel as much as we can, it's important for us to educate ourselves and to know about these facts so we can refute people who say, well, the Jews have never been there. Well, yeah, they were there for thousands of years before anybody else.
We might say in a broader sense, even though we don't bring it out in these articles, that as a culture, let's say that the culture of the West moves away from biblical Christianity and a reverence for the Bible itself and its historicity, don't they tend trending toward anti-Semitism as they move away from a biblical worldview?
Yes, you could see that in Europe during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Unfortunately, you can see that now.
Right.
It's becoming more difficult for Jews to live in certain parts of Europe, and sometimes I even see this trending now in the United States as well. It's a very sad time. I think it does encourage Jews to consider moving back to Israel.
And we continue to see that happening in France and Germany. Even today, as anti-Semitism is on the rise, you do see a renewed wave of European Jews immigrating back to the Holy Land, which of course is in fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Yeah.
So none of this takes God by surprise. But you know, even the Islamic faith, as we talked about in a previous broadcast, consider Jews and Christians to be people of the book. So they have to attack the book in order to attack the people of the book.
Yeah, if you can undermine the authority of the Bible, then what right do the Jews have to live in their ancient lands?
Right.
But to be honest, I mean, if Jews don't have the right to live in Beit El, where Jacob and Abraham erected altars to worshiping God, if they don't have the right to live in Shechem, where Joseph found his brothers and the tomb of Joseph is there, if they don't have the right to live in these places, then they don't have the right to live in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv.
Isn't that the point?
That's the point.
That's the one-state solution, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that next time, but I think we've reached a good stopping point for today. So, Carol, thank you for joining me for today's program and laying really the biblical foundation for the Jews' right to the land. It's not an assertion that's based upon fable or nationalism. It's based upon the very Word of God and the covenants that go all the way back to the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 12, and reiterated multiple times in the Old Testament. So I can understand how the enemies of Israel have to destroy the veracity of the Scripture to deny Israel a homeland. Well, we will continue this discussion, friends, on next week's program as we continue to explore issues preventing peace in the Middle East. We've been talking today with Carol Rushton about her brand new and very timely article on the battle on Arab-Israeli conflict. This is part 3, Issues Preventing Peace in the Middle East. This is actually a 3-part series of articles that is being published as our March, April, and May edition of the Last Days Beacon. These articles collectively will give you a deep understanding of the seemingly irresolvable hatred many Arab peoples have toward the nation Israel. And by the way, these articles will be incorporated in a brand new book that Carol is writing entitled Understanding the Middle East. Stay tuned for future information regarding this exciting new project. Friends, I'm sure you will want to obtain multiple copies of the May Last Days Beacon article entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Issues Preventing Peace in the Middle East. And now our announcer, Dane Rome, will share how you may obtain a copy of this timely article.
Thank you, Dr. Schnitker. Dear friends, every month, Southwest Prophecy Ministries produces an excellent article entitled The Last Days Beacon. These articles deal with a wide variety of subjects pertaining either to Bible prophecy or Christian liberty. Today's article is entitled The Arab-Israeli Conflict, Issues Preventing Peace in the Middle East. We're offering a complimentary copy of this article to each one who requests it. Simply go to our website, www.swpm.us, and then click on the Bookstore tab. Type Last Days Beacon in the Search tab and order your free copy of the Arab-Israeli Conflict, Issues Preventing Peace in the Middle East. You may also order extra copies to share with your family and friends. You may order 5 copies for $5, 25 copies for $15, or 100 copies for $60. When you order extra copies, you will automatically be placed on our mailing list to receive the monthly mailing of the Last Days Beacon. Well, please join us next week for another Last Days Beacon program brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. And until then, this is Dane Rome, your announcer, saying thank you for listening.